a commitment to climate. It's very tough to, make these short-term trade-offs. And, the key to the system has been that reliability, which intermittent sources, without a storage miracle, do not provide.
Last thing on that, when you talked about that grid in 2050. How much would you guess that nuclear is of that? Would you expect the share to?
It's bimodal. It'll either be 0% or a third. In the U.S. today, it's 20% of all power generation. In France today, it's 70% of all power generation. In Japan, it was 15% of all power generation. So it'll be pretty modal, somewhat by country, but this new design will either be viewed as acceptable or it won't happen.
A big theme of this conference, as I said, has been China and America. Earlier today, Henry Kissinger said we were in the foothills of a Cold War. As long as I've known you, you have been a passionate advocate of engagement with China. How do you view the current situation?
I'm even more passionate about the value of engagement than ever. The last few years have seen a lot of voices arguing against that, even arguing in some extreme cases for so-called decoupling. I think it's a benefit that there's interdependence. The fact that we have tourists from Japan, we have from China, we have students from China, we have companies that do research in China. Apple is the tech company that actually sells, the only tech company that actually sells a lot of products here in China. That interdependence can lead to more dialogue, more mutual understanding. And so to have people arguing against that is definitely a serious concern.
Do you worry at all about a world with two internets, or do you think the world is too interconnected? I mean, people out here are saying that you could end up with effectively a Chinese internet and an American internet. Is that possible? Or certainly two very different technology systems?
I don't see a way of bifurcating scientific research. So AI, which you publish almost all of the work you do, I don't see a way that you can sort of say, okay, these countries are publishing to each other and these other countries are publishing to each other. Biology, energy, AI, it just doesn't work like that. The idea, the U.S. has thrived intellectually by being at the R&D level a very open country, and that has been to the benefit of the U.S. in terms of things like pharmaceutical companies or software technology companies. And you can't, just carry around little notes to each other. Hey, don't give this to somebody whose grandmother was Chinese. It doesn't work.
Surely that is an attitude that is, you may well be saying the correct thing from the point of view of the world economy, from the point of view of efficiency, but there's quite a lot of evidence that some people are prepared to take that on. You wouldn't have trade wars if people were rational.
Well, it'd be interesting to have somebody draw out their bifurcation and try to explain, I'll describe a person to them. I'll describe, Australia, Japan. What side are they saying, which is the open science side? Who's going to go and close all their publishing down and, require that only a small set of people have access to that? AI is very hard to put back in the bottle, and whoever has the open system will so vastly get ahead of whoever tries to not let everybody in the world see what they're doing, that you can completely ignore whoever tries to close their system.
On that subject, what's your estimation of who's ahead in different parts of AI at the moment? Are you one of those people who think that this is an area where China seems to lead the US in some bits?
Even that's kind of a silly thing in my view in terms of what does it mean? I mean, I spent last night 3 hours at the Microsoft Research Lab in Beijing, which is across the street from Tsinghua University. A lot of the best AI work in Microsoft is being done in that lab. They publish papers about the work they do. What is that? Is that Chinese AI? Is that American AI? We gladly pay their salaries, but if we didn't have that publishing approach, those people would go and work somewhere else. And so the world is at a certain state of the art in terms of AI. The companies that fund that in a strong leadership way include Google and Microsoft. But even at universities, they're not far behind whatever the latest commercial funded R&D stuff.
Maybe rephrase it then. Regardless of who's funding it, I accept both American companies. Is there any kind of approximation about which areas you think China is ahead in, which areas you think Europe is ahead in, which areas you think America is ahead in?
Almost every one of those papers is going to have some Chinese names on it and some European names and some American names on it. Even the stuff that comes out of we have a big lab in Cambridge in the UK, and God forbid there's, Asian people in that lab. It's incredible how these people are mixing up and working with each other. Who allowed this to happen?
It'll all stop after Brexit. But in general, in that you have been a great beneficiary of globalization, and you have been a great sponsor of it and a defender of it. Are you worried about it at the moment?
More than I was 5 years ago, yeah. And it's not just the U.S. I mean, the UK is very interesting, and the turning inward. Is it cyclical? Because you're always going to have populism come along. The elites, in some ways, will overplay their hand, and you're going to cycle. Or is it secular and it's going to stay that way? I think all of us, come to forums like this seeking insight into, what will turn this around and let very tough problems like climate change be done on a global collaborative basis.
Do you worry the ability of elites at the moment to persuade people that issues like climate change?
It's gone down.
It's gone down.
It's definitely gone down. And whether you want to stop pandemics or solve climate change or stop terrorism, that when you don't get that level of cooperation and trust, that's going to be a huge challenge.
Do you have an explanation for that? I know you read a lot.
No, I'm just I'm not out there asking, yellow vest people why they vote a certain way, or, people in Australia who voted against climate change, or people in, Brazil or Philippines or various places. But it's hard to pick a country where you say, wow, they've got climate change solved. They know how to make steel and cement, and, congratulations. That one's taken care of. I don't know that country.
But it's bizarre, isn't it? Because every government that you visit, that we visit, will say that the green industries are the industries of the future. That's what they want to invest in.
That's great. Did they increase their energy R&D budget? What approach? Who are they investing in to solve these specific problems? At the Paris climate talks, I was involved with the 25 countries committing to doubling energy R&D, which that is really good, because for the long lead time stuff, that's where the solutions are going to come from. Many countries have come through. We have $5 billion of additional energy R&D since the Paris climate talks, and I am optimistic that we can bring what I call the green premium, that is the extra cost of doing things in a green way. We can bring that premium down very dramatically, which, to say to a middle-income country where India is paradigmatic, hey, you should make your electricity this way, you should make your steel this way, you should fly your planes this way. In order to be able to say that to them, you have to bring the current green premium down by about 90%. But there's many paths to get there. Many scientists who are working ideas that even with the 10% success rate, if we sort of unnaturally accelerate this by creating incentives, regulations, raising R&D budgets, I still believe we can get there.
One last question on that. If you were a government, where would you target that money?
Well, there are, different people do the taxonomy differently. There are things like cheap hydrogen, breakthroughs in transmission where you don't have to do it overhead, or you use superconducting to make it lossless. It's a reasonably finite list. The way I do it in my book, it's 14 things that you want crazy people to think through exactly how they're going to solve those things.
And if it isn't governments, it has to be philanthropists like you.
Well, yes, for the pure R&D part, ideally the governments are going to be bigger. I mean, U.S. DOE budget, which I think should be tripled, is $6 billion a year. So I don't think you're going to get that extra, $12 billion a year out of philanthropy. We did go, I called, 25 people, and I got 21 people to say yes when I called them to invest in this very high-risk venture fund called Breakthrough Energy Ventures. And, we raised $1 billion the first time. We're going to do that many times again so that these high-risk companies, that there's lots of capital. And the great thing that's happened in the last few years is as Breakthrough Energy's technical team has validated these things, we've been able to have other people come in. So far, we haven't had to be the sole investor in any of these companies, even though over half of them, if Breakthrough Energy hadn't been there to help them form the management and explain how the technology works, they would not have come together.
We could carry on talking for a long time, but these gentlemen sadly have to come and ladies have to go to dinner. I'm going to give, first can we thank Bill very much, and then I'm going to give you a variety of housekeeping things. Thank you. The housekeeping is that please note a change to our start time. Tomorrow morning the plenary will begin at 8:15, not 8:30. And the important information tonight is the Beijing Municipality Government welcome dinner at the Sunrise Kempinski. Shuttles will be leaving directly from the front of the conference centre, and you have to bring your badge and your red invitation. And 6:15 will be the networking reception, and 7 p.m. is the gala dinner. I originally read it as the Gates dinner, but we will go in that direction. Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you.
At first, the headline crossed and pre-market Uber was dancing 6%. But actually, tomorrow, after the deadline, if you're in London and want to get an Uber, you can still do because they will appeal it. And you were telling me that during the appeal period, they can still operate.
Exactly. It'll be business as usual, at least as far as drivers and riders are concerned for the foreseeable future. Uber has said it will appeal, and it had 21 days to do so, but it said this morning that it's going to. And as long as an appeal process is in process, then it can continue to operate. If it loses its appeal, which could be months down the line, it could still take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. That could take years. So at least in the immediate future, there should be little change, at least on the streets of London.
So what is TfL taking issue with?
Well, one of the main issues all centres around the app. So essentially, it's been possible, and there's been evidence of this happening, that a unlicensed driver, or maybe a driver that once had a licence and had it revoked, was able to use another driver's app. So essentially, you're driving in an uninsured vehicle, and that's massively against policy. So there's massive changes needed to the app, still needed, apparently.
I thought the chief executive had done quite a lot to ensure safety of passengers.
He's done a lot, and TfL acknowledged that the improvements have been made, but I think as they've gone through the last couple of years, since the last announcement of a ban, other things have raised their head, and one of them is just that there's not quite enough security in terms of how the app is used to verify whether a driver is the correct driver in a vehicle. So more work needs to be done on that front still. Okay,
can they do it in time for the appeal?
That's a good question. I certainly will be asking that. I don't see any reason why not. I mean, Uber, London is one of the markets for Uber, so it's very much in its interest to do it before the appeal. How that takes, I mean, that's anybody's guess at this point, but it certainly could be months before we know anything even slightly concrete.
What was the overall message that she sent out? The overall message is that there's nothing new coming from the government. There's no new concessions. There's no new strategy. It's basically she's going to be following the pre-existing strategy that was happening before this election, which was trying to engage in dialogue with residents in the city. And that dialogue had been disrupted because there was increasingly violent protests, which were maybe a sign that the process of dialogue wasn't working in the first place. But she's going to go back to that, hoping for calm now and seeing if she can sort of kickstart that again.